You're not alone. You're recalibrating. You think something's wrong, that your silence means you're slipping, that something's wrong because no one hears from you anymore. But what if silence wasn't a symptom, but a strategy? What if this isolation isn't absence, but alignment? You didn't disappear. You unplugged from noise, from expectation, from emotional signals that used to control your rhythm. This isn't you breaking down. This is you breaking the loop. Because the longer you stay in the room, the more you become what the room needs. But when you step out, you start hearing again, not their frequency, but yours. And that moment, when you choose to stop broadcasting, stop responding, stop explaining, you don't lose presence. You reclaim position. Cold mind knows real recalibration doesn't happen in crowds. It happens in tactical solitude. And now, you're not retreating. You're restructuring. You didn't vanish. You just stopped leaking signal so you could rebuild your source. You can't hear yourself. If you're always tuned into them, you didn't choose who you became. You inherited it. From feedback, from patterns, from the constant echo of other people's frequencies inside your nervous system. Because when you never step out, you don't evolve. You adapt. You adjust your tone based on their tone. You shift your pace based on their energy. You call it connection, but it's actually calibration to everyone but you. Every room you enter sends signals of how to behave, how to speak, how much of you is too much. And when you're always available, always accessible, always plugged into that current, you overwrite your original signal until it's no longer yours. Because you're never still long enough to hear what's truly yours. That's why isolation matters, not to escape the world, but to hear what the world has been drowning out. When you're in noise 24/7, you stop realizing you're adjusting. You think it's just who you are, but it's not. It's who you became to survive constant input. And when that input never stops, neither does the erosion. Cold mind knows, until you extract yourself from the field, you will always move by external signal, not internal structure. That's not freedom. That's programmed response. So when you step back, when you unplug, when you let the silence stretch, that's not weakness. That's the first moment you begin returning to center. The noise didn't erase you. It just kept you too busy to remember where you really are. The longer you stay in the noise, the less you know what's yours. You don't change because someone told you to. You change because you've been exposed to signals long enough to forget which ones were yours. The noise isn't always loud. Sometimes it's subtle, polite, disguised as norms, as connection, as that's just how things are. And you adapt. You shrink a little, so you're easier to digest. You edit a little, so you're less disruptive. You agree, just enough to stay liked. You call it being flexible, but it's really erosion. A loop forms. You enter a space, you read the signals, you adjust, you get approval, you repeat. And soon you don't ask, do I align with this? You ask, how do I stay in this without friction? That's not growth. That's signal loss, masquerading as harmony. And every time you do it, you lose 1% of your inner signal. Not all at once, just slowly enough that you forget it ever sounded different. Until one day, you're exhausted, but don't know why. You're misaligned, but can't locate the source. Cold mind locates it for you. You've been adjusting to outdated frequencies and calling it reality. That's why you need to leave, not forever, but long enough to let your nervous system detangle from the emotional GPS you didn't program. You can't fix this from inside the noise. you need to cut the feed. Every space you stay in too long without recalibrating reshapes you into a version you never consciously chose. Strategic isolation. 3 phases to rebuild yourself without interference. You don't isolate to escape. You isolate to reprogram. Cold mind doesn't see isolation as weakness. It sees it as a system-level reset. Here's how it works. 1. Extraction phase. Cut the feed. Step 1. You unplug. Not forever, but long enough to stop syncing with signals that no longer serve you. You silence the chat. You step away from social input. You stop reacting to what the world wants and listen to what you've ignored. At first, it feels empty. Then it feels clean. Because when you stop broadcasting, you stop leaking energy. And when the feed goes silent, you start to hear your own internal frequency. Second rebuilding phase. Connect inward. Once the noise clears, you don't fill it. You sit with it. This is where real recalibration happens. You recode the values that were installed without consent, the goals you inherited, the shoulds that no longer fit. And slowly, you write your own internal code. No validation needed, no applause required, just structure built from solitude. You ask, what version of me can lead without performing? Third reintegration phase. Return with structure. Now you return, but differently. You re-enter the world not to merge with it, but to hold shape within it. You no longer adjust your pace just because the room is loud. You no longer shift your language to soften your edge. You show up as someone who's already centered, and therefore doesn't need external rhythm to feel real. This is power, not because you isolated, but because you did something with that silence. Strategic isolation isn't distance, it's design. It's how you stop being a mirror for everyone else's energy and start becoming a transmitter of your own. You don't isolate to disappear. You isolate to rebuild in a way no one can touch again. He went silent for 90 days. What came back was unrecognizable. He didn't announce it. No long caption. No dramatic "I need space" post. He just disappeared. Off the grid. Off the feed. Off every platform that used to control his attention. They called it absence. He called it design. Told him he should stay connected. He ignored all of it. Because this wasn't a cry for help. It was a strategic shutdown. What they didn't know? He was rebuilding. For the first time in years, there was no input. No ping, no false urgency. Just space. Just silence. And inside that silence, he met himself again. He questioned everything. Why did he chase approval so often? Why was his energy always leaking? Why did he say yes when no would have built structure? He didn't work on himself the way people say. He deprogrammed. Every day. Less noise, fewer reflexes, more alignment. And when he came back, he wasn't louder. He was quieter, but heavier. Not in tone, but in gravity. He no longer rushed to respond, no longer reacted to tone shifts, no longer adjusted just to keep peace. People felt it. They didn't say, "Wow, you've changed." They just responded differently. Because his stillness retrained the room. That's the power of strategic isolation. You don't come back with a speech. You come back with a frequency that can't be pulled anymore. He didn't reinvent himself. He just removed everything that wasn't his to begin with. Final message. You don't disappear when you step back. You just stop echoing. You weren't born to stay available. You weren't built to respond on demand. You weren't designed to sync with every signal just to stay relevant. You were designed to recenter. And that doesn't happen in the noise. It happens in strategic absence. The world taught you, Visibility equals value. Engagement equals existence. But cold mind sees through that. Because when you step away, you don't fade. You stop echoing. You stop reacting. You stop explaining. You stop bending to the rhythm of environments that never matched you. And in that stillness, you realize isolation isn't disconnection. It's reinstallation. You're not gone. You didn't go offline. You just unplugged from the version they programmed. And that's the beginning of something real. You'll return, but with edge, with clarity, with architecture that no longer adapts on impact. Not because you changed, but because you finally heard yourself without interference. In the next video, we'll dismantle the death of empathic obedience, why being caring became self-erasure, and how cold mind restores boundaries without losing depth. Subscribe, pull away, come back unreadable.